Good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning into Molly's Salon. This is our weekly program every Thursday evening where I interview innovative thinkers and creative firebrands. We're living through a critical time in American history, the COVID-19 pandemic, and a vital social justice movement led by Black Lives Matter. Our guests are a variety of artists and leaders discussing new ideas, how they're coping with the coronavirus and making positive social change, as well as showing us glimmers of hope for the future. My guests this evening are Psalmayene, 24, playwright, director, actor, and arena stage master teaching artist; Deborah Brevoort, playwright and musical theater librettist, lyricist, with projects like the Women of Lockerbie and My Lord, What a Night; and Lex Sant, who's the president of the Sant Foundation. So welcome to you, Psalmayene, 24, who is an award-winning playwright, director, and actor. Psalm, as his colleagues call him, is the Andrew Mellon Foundation playwright in residence at Mosaic Theater and the Doris Duke Artist in Residence at Studio Theater. He was a playwright for Arena's online film, May 22nd, 2020, and a director for our newest film premiering next week, The 51st State. So Psalm, it's so great to see you tonight. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure, Molly. Thanks for having me. Always great to talk to you.
Well, I was just reminding Psalm, and he knows it too well, he and I came to Arena at the same time 23 years ago.
That's right. That's
so
right.
I watched you grow up from a young artist to where you are now, and I'm super proud of you, Psalm.
Thank you so much. And we were just saying, I mean, that time flies. You blink and, you know, a decade has zoomed by. You blink again, another decade, and then you blink again, and we're in a worldwide pandemic. Who would have thought it?
Who would have thought it is right? Yeah. And you, in the midst of all this, Psalm, there are so many hats that you wear. You're also an expert teaching artist with Arena. You've got a great deal of experience working with people of all ages. This fall, people can take a masterclass from you on hip hop theater and go to the Arena Stage website for more information on that. But I'm curious, how do you navigate between all the different types of artists that you work with?
It's funny, my family's Jamaican, so there's a stereotype that Jamaicans have many jobs, and there's some truth in that. I mean, I saw my grandfather, I grew up with my grandfather in the same house, and this was a man who dropped out of school in the 6th grade, came to America and made an incredible life for himself, bought property eventually all around Brooklyn. The house that I grew up in Park Slope was the house that he bought. So this idea of doing as many things as you can possibly do, I got from him. He was a tiler. He loved photography. He painted homes. He was a landlord. I mean, he did a lot of things, and he was just a lover of beauty. And I think that's one thing that I certainly inherited from him. And I saw sort of how he navigated everything that he did, and everything seemed connected. So I don't necessarily compartmentalize in my mind all the different, acting and playwriting and directing and teaching. I sort of have this holistic outlook on everything that I do. And I think that is a direct result of the type of family that I had and have.
Well, I definitely see that in you, Psalm, because you seem to move seamlessly from one to the other. I mean, for example, you were a playwright for us on May 22nd, 2020, which is our second online film. And then we've just completed The 51st State, and you were one of the directors on that as well, one of the directors of the monologues. Can you talk about that experience and how it was for you, because we were out shooting on location. you had two wonderful actors that you were working with.
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about May 22nd because that piece changed my life. The monologue that I wrote, I spoke to a man by the name of Xavier Brown, and he's an urban farmer. And I didn't even know that was a thing until I spoke to him. And he talked a lot about, the African American community's connection to the land and relationship to the land, and really reconnecting with nature. And after that monologue, that's what I did. I've been diving into nature since I wrote that piece, and it's really sort of transformed me and my relationship to the world. So that's one thing. So writing that was phenomenal, a phenomenal experience. Then you asked me to if I would be interested in directing a couple of pieces in the 51st state. And again, going back to my Jamaican roots, I said, sure, why? I mean, I've never directed film before, but that is a medium that I want to continue to explore and work in. So I jumped at the opportunity, and then to work with Gary Perkins and Justin Weeks. Those were the two actors who did the monologues that I directed. And Greg wrote one of the monologues. Greg Kessler, if I'm saying his last name correctly.
And Strasser, yep.
And Strasser, So I mean, that was just a wonderful experience, and to explore the themes of DC statehood and this new uprising that we're going through, and to see how those two things converge was just truly magical.
I've been thinking about the difference between the two films, because the first film was really about how we're coping in Washington, D.C. on a single day with COVID-19. And that film to me was very much about mourning and loss.
Yeah.
And this film, which is the 51st state, is about what happened after the murders. Mm-hmm. And the particular murder of George Floyd, with the protests and the growing movement toward racial justice, and how Washington, D.C. is fighting for statehood. And that film feels to me like it's all about action, and it's all about speaking your mind.
It totally, yeah.
It's while you talk about that, I'm going to turn off the oven. This is a moment on the Salon when something happens in life.
This is live TV, folks, so you never know. Molly's going to get up and go ahead and turn off the oven, and she might come back with a cake. Who knows what she'll come back with? But in terms of what Molly was talking about, in terms of the mourning spirit that existed in the first film, I think this era is like an epic moment of mourning for us. We're not only mourning the literal lives that have been lost to COVID, we're mourning a way of life. And it's sort of like the kind of death that happens that comes like out of the blue too. None of us had any time to prepare for it. We had to sort of just deal with it. And I think we're trying to process what the F has happened and what is going on. And I think with the 51st state, it takes us a little bit deeper into that exploration and into that making sense of it all, which is what we do as artists anyway.
And I love that. There was a question in the chat room about whether or not I was going to serve everybody cookies. So right. But it's a baked chicken. It's a big baked chicken.
Oh,
which
cool.
Is, people got more and more into cooking during the pandemic, right? More people are getting into more creativity. Mm-hmm. And I think you're absolutely right, Sam, in terms of how the 51st state goes more deeply into what people are thinking and what's driving them. I think that this time of introspection has opened us up in a different way.
100%. And, it makes me also think about that Joni Mitchell song, you never know what you got until it's gone, that lyric that she has. And it's like, what I'm missing is that just the human connection, and just being able to shake somebody's hand and hugs. I mean, I live with my wife here, so I can hug her and kiss her and all that. But we're social creatures. We need to mix it up, and we need to be in groups. And I think that's why we're missing theater so much too, because that gets to the heart of who we are as a species, that ritual coming together.
And Decker is asking a really interesting question. How do we maintain the energy behind the rallies and the protests that happened this summer? And I think a piece of that gets answered a bit in 51st State, but I see we're right about time right now, Sam. So I have to ask you one final question is, what's bringing you joy right now?
What's bringing me joy? Going out into nature. I just went out to the Shenandoah Mountains last weekend with my wife, and just reconnecting with the mountains and the sky. That's bringing me great joy.
I love it. Thanks so much, Sam. Love seeing you. Can't wait to see you in the flesh.
Yes,
all right,
indeed.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Deborah Brevoort is a playwright and librettist from Alaska who now lives in the New York City area. She's an alumna of New Dramatist. She was an actor, a writer, and producing director at Perseverance Theater in Juneau, Alaska, and a co-founder of Theater Without Borders, a group of individual artists dedicated to international theater exchange. She is also a writer with Flash Acts, a joint project with Arena Stage, Georgetown University, and the Forum for Cultural Engagement. So welcome, Deb. It's great to see you.
Hey, Molly. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. And Deb and I go way back to probably back like 35 years, maybe.
Maybe a little longer.
35, maybe 40 years.
Yes.
And, during the pandemic, I have to say, I've been reminded of the early days of Perseverance Theater during these times. We used to perform in really odd places, getting out into the community, taking a ferry into a fishing village, performing in an airplane bunker, basically. And navigating where we are now kind of reminds me of figuring out new ways to do things. And I'm just curious, Deb, because you're a writer and you're a thinker, and how has the health pandemic changed you?
Well, I think that's a really great insight about Perseverance, because during those early years, we were just involved in making stuff up as we went along. And now that's the same situation now, right? It's all these things have gone away. So now we have to figure out a new way to do it. So, I've been thinking about a whole lot of things. I started an exercise with my students at Columbia and NYU called Back to the Future. And it's a scavenger hunt where we're looking through old forms of theater. And we've all discovered some really amazing things, which is that back in the medieval times, there were theater that was taking place outside, taking place in the theater square, theater that was a parade. We're looking at Toby shows, which are Midwestern plays that were done in the back of hay wagons in Kansas, kinds of thing. And so I think we have to sort of rethink what we're doing. But I've been spending, this gives us an opportunity. It's like we get to hit the pause button, we get to hit the reset button. And so I find myself thinking a lot about what's theater? I am not a doomsdayer. I think theater's coming back. I think we need it. I think it will be back. I'm not sure when, but I think it will be back. And so we get to reinvent it. And when do you get an opportunity like that? It's fabulous. It's difficult, it's hard, but it's fabulous. And so I'm very hopeful, actually. I think that we have an opportunity to revitalize it. I think it's going to come roaring back to life. I think people are really going to feel the need and the hunger for it because we haven't had it. I think it's going to change what the theater is. I think we're going to be so tired of these sort of flat two-dimensional worlds that we're viewing material in, that we're going to crave shows that have lots of dimension and lots of theatricality. I think we're going to enter an era of maximum theatricality. I think my prediction, realism will be dead. Family drama will be dead. Lights up on the living room couch, dead. We've been on our living room couches since March, right? We want shows that are going to get us out of the house. So I'm thinking in those terms, right? I actually think we're entering a Shakespearean age that we need to, it's go big or go home. That's where I think we're headed. And so that's how I'm thinking. I'm thinking in terms of size and scope and scale. And obviously every play or musical or opera that I write has to be about a person, but Shakespeare taught us that the individual lives in a family, lives in a society, lives in the world, and the work needs to have that scope and that range. And I think audiences will be hungry for that, and I've spent my time in quarantine writing and trying to meet that standard, because I think that's where we're going.
That's great. I love that, Deb. I love that. Go big or go home.
Yeah.
I do think that is the moment, because in order to pry people out of their homes and get them into the theater, it's going to have to be something that people are energized by, ignited by, their imaginations are taken by. Great idea about realism being dead.
I also think maybe the social issue play is sort of a thing of the past, because we're being beamed with that, right? I mean, not that I'm not saying that plays aren't political or shouldn't be, but I think we have to go bigger, we have to go deeper, we have to have bigger ideas.
Somebody's asking a question about, are you feeling compelled right now to write about certain things, or is it just coming out of your imagination? You're just going.
I am, gosh, that's a really good question. Let me think about that. I'm writing a lot of different things, and I was exceedingly blessed that I received 4 different commissions during the quarantine and 1 right before the quarantine. And so I have had a full plate of plays and operas, because I write opera now, that I've been working on. And I've been, but I keep thinking in terms of scale and size.
Yeah.
So I'm not so much zooming in on topics, but I feel that, we have to write from the heart, we have to write from the head. So I'm really thinking in terms of scale. I'm writing in style. I'm thinking in those terms. I'm thinking very formally. I kind of always do that anyway, but
yeah,
that's how I'm approaching it, and writing a lot of different things.
That's great, Deb. I'm really curious about flash acts, because you're working on a project that has 10 American writers and 10 Russian writers.
Yeah.
And you're writing 10-minute plays about isolation, all to be produced on Zoom. And each one of the plays, if it's an American play, it's being translated into Russian. It'll have Russian actors and American actors. Of course, 2 separate projects. Tell us a little bit about the play and the festival, because we only have a couple minutes left.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of it. I love doing international work, and spend a lot of my career is spent working overseas and working on international projects. So this was sort of right up my alley. What I really love this project, and I actually learned some really important things. But first of all, we all had to write to Zoom. And so I felt like, well, I had to do everything I do as a playwright. I just had to think in terms of the medium in a different way. And so I found that to be just artistically really creative and challenging. But I also feel like the insight that I got from it was that the 10-minute play has finally found its form. Because for me, the 10-minute play is an unsatisfactory experience in the theater. When I go to the theater, I want a full meal. I want a big show. I don't want a 10-minute play. But I also don't want to sit on the computer and watch a full-length production.
Sure.
The 10-minute play is perfect for the web, for Zoom. So I feel like, oh, this is what the 10-minute play was meant to be all along. And anyway, so I realized that in working, and I found it much more creative to write a 10-minute play for a web platform than for a stage. So that was really interesting. And I sort of liked, you know, we were given a broad theme of isolation, and that's something that all of us are experiencing. And I wrote about my own isolation. I figured, well, you know, I'm going to write about a hacker. I don't know if that was too. It's a Russian exchange, so I put a hacker in there. So, but you know, I thought there's all different ways that people are isolated, and everybody's isolated. So I appreciated the chance to sort of go deep into that idea for 10 minutes. So,
Well, you did a beautiful job on it, and I can't wait for the festival, which is happening in October, and it's over several days. So people tune in, and it's great to see you, Deb.
Oh, it's great
Thanks so
to see
much for
you.
coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Bye. Lex Sant has been president of the Sant Foundation since its inception in 2015 and a director since 2016. He's responsible for developing strategies and initiatives that support the foundation's mission. Prior to starting the Sant Foundation, he was co-founder and managing director of Persimmon Tree Capital, a private investment fund focused on renewable energy and energy efficiency investments. Lex, it's so great to see you.
Molly, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you. Lex, you're a dedicated environmentalist.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about what you have felt since the health pandemic. What have you seen in the world? What have you seen that's changed in the world? What have you seen that hasn't changed in the world?
Well, I think it's led everyone, as you know, as Psalm was saying, to reconsider the value of the natural world. I think one of the things we've noticed is people go to parks. People want to connect, you know, with the earth. They want to recognize both its natural resources and its natural beauty. It's also identified this enormous inequity in access to parks. If you want to look at where poor people live in a city, look at the map of the trees in that city. So I think there are ways in which natural resources and access to natural spaces coincide with this significant experience, which is revealing all of the inequities that are so abundant in America. And I think it's giving people reason to consider those questions in really profound and important ways.
Do you feel that people have become more thoughtful since the pandemic started? Are we looking inside ourselves more? Is this a moment in time, or is this something that will continue?
I mean, I think there are so many more people qualified to answer that than me, but I'll tell you that I think this is a really important and reflective time for many of us. I think it's a time when we've had a chance to consider what we value. I think it's been a time we've considered fundamental assumptions about our lives. I think, you know, the relationship of Black Lives Matter to the pandemic is inescapable. And I think the way in which those profound questions are being asked give rise to solutions that I think would not have been possible otherwise. So, you know, I'm enormously hopeful for what comes from this enormous difficulty.
So what's the future, Lex?
It's a really good question.
What's the future? I mean, you look so deeply into the environment, into the world, even though you say you may not be qualified to answer whether or not we're introspective or not. Obviously, you're a great watcher of human nature. What do you think is going to happen next?
I mean, I run a small foundation. We have about 12 people here, and you know, it's an inherently optimistic thing that we do. We have the the point of view that we can do something with resources that are far smaller than the scale of the problems we try to approach, and see if we can do something to be of consequence in making the world a better place. It's the same spirit that moves anyone doing anything creative, an impulse to say, let me reveal something about the world that will move people to think about it differently. Let me intervene in a small way to produce a large result. So, you know, and yet there are plenty of things around us that could separate us from that sense of optimism. There are plenty of ways that we can become discouraged by conditions and circumstances. I mean, there's fires in California. There are, we've already had hurricanes. If you think about climate change as a long-lived pandemic. And yet there are ways in which I see progress that give me some evidence that we actually can address some of these challenges in ways that sometimes are deflating. I looked just getting ready for this, and we've grown GDP in this country by 42% while we reduced carbon emissions by 20% in the last 9 years. We are doing a lot that we don't know about. And I think that means if we can do a little bit, and it's nowhere near enough, I'm not suggesting that, but it means that we have the capacity for large scale change on timescales that we can't imagine. So when I drive to work in July and see 1 of every 3 people wearing a mask, and then I drive to work in August, and the only reason I'm at my office right now is that my wife can't stand to have me at home so much. We don't have a place where I can talk. Is when I see everyone now wearing a mask, that was unimaginable 6 months and 3 days ago when DC had its first COVID case. And so we know that these transformations can take place in the kinds of scales that's required, but it takes a motivation and an understanding that it's hard for us to know when those moments will come.
Yeah, and we're lucky that our mayor has really been very focused on our health and has demanded and legislated that we wear masks, and it makes a huge difference. It's exactly right.
For all of us that have lived in Washington for a long time, we've lived through the dark times, the difficult times when our administration was not a source of pride. And I think the administration of the city and Tony Williams played an important role, and Mayor Bowser is doing a wonderful job. We're lucky to live where we do.
Yeah, we really are. Okay, I have a crazy question for you. I bet we have a lot of people out there who drink non-alcoholic beer. What do you think is the best non-alcoholic beer that we can tell our viewers about?
I'm not paid to say this, but if you don't know about Athletic Brewing Company, just Google them. They're worth it. I first found them in a small town up in Maine, and apparently this is now the product of 7.3 billion people on the earth. You can get artisanal anything. Someone decided to make non-alcoholic beer good for the first time in forever. So.
That's great. I love that. I love the fact that earlier in your career, you worked for the Carolina Panthers football team.
Their mascot is a black cat, by the way.
A black cat.
Yeah, so just know we did have a little bad luck.
You did. And football now is at the forefront it's been at the forefront of racial tension for years. And finally, the Washington team is changing its name from a name that I won't even mention because it's gone now. Right. So how can sports or football help move us forward?
Well, I think in the same way that any group of thoughtful people with a place to stand and speak can move us forward. You know, what I've said to the folks here, and it's what I believe, is that the greatest privilege in any fire is to have a bucket in your hand. And, you know, the great athletes of professional sports and others, you know, have a platform to speak and share their perspective and for people to hear it in ways they wouldn't hear it otherwise. And, you know, Colin Kaepernick, who helped lead a lot of this and, you know, followed in the footsteps of others, is an amazing leader who got a raw deal. And I think, time is proving him right.
Lex, thank you for this really beautiful interview.
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna be thinking about the bucket metaphor. Absolutely. And thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Appreciate seeing you.
Do I get some of the chicken later?
You do.
All right.
Come on over.
A virtual chicken from Molly.
Thanks, Lex.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. My guest next week will be Colleen Cenet Jennings, who's professor of theater emerita at American University. She's a playwright. J.J. Johnson, who's an actor and a playwright and a screenwriter, and Monica Hopkins, who's the executive director of the ACLU of the District of Columbia. And I just want to thank my guests today. I mean, what a thoughtful group of people. We had great pre-conversations before, and it's just a joy to be on the salon with people with this kind of thinking. And I wish everybody was here to sit down for the roast chicken, but sadly, today we have a wonderful gift of art. It is a Get Out the Vote video that some of you may have seen, but it's just brilliantly done.
The vote is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in the democratic society. We must not allow the power of the vote to be neutralized. We must never go back.
1, 2, 3, 4. Voting rights we're fighting for. 5, 6, 7, 8. We cannot afford to wait. In 1865, justice was for some denied. The abolitionists bravely to denounce, decry that we the people form the union and deserve to see for every man and woman, black or white, equality. Frederick Douglass, 1865.
I am for the immediate, unconditional, and universal enfranchisement of the black man in every state in the Union. Without it, his liberty is a mockery.
Mary Church Terrell, 1912.
What could be more absurd than to have one group of human beings who are denied rights working to prevent another group from obtaining those same rights?
To be treated as a human being. Don't you take away my dignity. In a democracy to have a voice. I got a right to vote. In 1955, equality was still denied. So freedom marches took to fighting for our civil rights. Forced our nation to confront its inhumanity. For every man and woman, black or white, the greater race. They are arrested, 1957.
Dear Martin, we know that while it's necessary to say no to racial injustice, this must be followed by a positive program of action. The struggle for the right to vote, for economic uplift of the people.
Fannie Lou Hamer, 1964.
1870, the 15th Amendment gave every man a chance to vote. And now it's 64, and they still trying to keep us away from the ballot. You say, honey, I'm behind you. Well, move. I don't want you back there. I want you to say, honey, I'm with you, and we'll go up this freedom road together.
To be treated as a human being. Don't you take away my dignity. In a democracy to have a voice. I got a right to vote. 2, 3, 4. Voting rights we're fighting for. 5, 6, 7, 8. We cannot afford to wait. Lyndon B. Johnson, 1965.
It was more than 100 years ago Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. A century has passed since equality was promised and the Negro is not yet equal. The time for justice has now come. No force can hold it back.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 2013.
The sad irony of the court's decision today lies in its utter failure to grasp why the Voting Rights Act has proven effective. Throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm.